Provalenko from Outback Power. He's going to give a presentation on the past and future of energy storage, followed by a panel presentation, or some panelists, local installers who will be, well, I guess giving a quasi post-mortem, those are my words, about the legislative session, what happened over the last several months, and they'll give their kind of take on what happened and maybe their crystal ball as to what we'll see down the road. So this should be and that we'll have a Q&A discussion obviously after that. Couple announcements later on this month, July 25. Visit us at Northwest Solar Fest. Solar Washington will have a booth, and if you have any questions about solar, come by and see us. Also, in October, Solar Washington will be presenting the Solar Summit this year, and we're fired up about it. So stay tuned for details. We are working out the agenda and speakers as we speak, but check our website from time to time, and we'll get it up there as soon as possible. We're really excited about this to take the baton, if you will, and I think it's going to be it goes without saying, there'll be a very spirited discussion, perhaps based on what happened in Olympia this year. So finally, as I always do at every meeting, I don't want to bend over like this. I want to thank our members and sponsors. As you know, without your support, we couldn't do this. So your support helps us pay the bills and helps us, well, put on the general meeting, be at Solar Fest, give presentations, so on and so forth. So we greatly appreciate your support. And if you would like to become a member, or if your business would like to sponsor Solar Washington, we encourage you to do so. And we put your money to good use by promoting solar throughout Washington. So again, please do consider it. And for those of you who are members and sponsors, a big thanks. So other than that, let's start the presentation. Did Brandon come in yet? Okay. So we'll start with Brandon Provalenko of Outback Power, talking about energy storage.
Oh, you're the clicker.
Next slide, please.
Great. All right. So first of all, does anybody know, can anybody answer how many gallons of water it takes to light a light bulb? You know what? I don't have the answer to it. It's a pretty big equation, I think. Yes, sir, in the back. That's exactly why I love working in solar. It's so much. That's it right there. You know. I think it's also, as my friend here, Phil Undercuffler, would say, it depends, right? It depends. It depends on how you're generating electricity, right? So coal, nuclear, whatever you're using, it all requires a lot of water. So in the U.S., I have 655 billion gallons of water to power generation every year, right? 655. That's a big number, and that probably solves some problems for California. Today's presentation is going to talk about solving problems. Actually, you're good there for a second. Renewable energy solves a lot of problems, right? Solar, microhydro, wind. Energy storage complements those. And today we're going to talk about exactly how that is. Now you might think we're going to talk about the past, right? This being a lead acid battery bank, and oh, lead acid's bad, and these things are all old school or something like that. And then if you can go to the next slide, we'll talk about the future, right? Tesla. Who's heard of Tesla? All right, yeah. I mean, is anybody here because they're hoping to talk about Tesla tonight? Okay, a couple of people want to talk about Tesla. So we can talk about Tesla. We actually have a lot of experts in the room. But I'm not here to talk about Tesla or the previous lead acid battery bank. Next slide, please. I'm here because I want to talk about solving problems. I want to show a little bit about how energy storage solves those problems. Now, I might do a little shameless pitching of our brand, Outback Power. Outback Power, we've been working with energy storage in the renewable energy industry for about 14 years, since 2001. We're good at it. We like it. We like working with all of the energy storage technologies that are out there. Anybody work with energy storage today? So many faces are familiar in here. It's great. So energy storage solves a lot of problems. When we really think about the past, we're talking about, gosh, I think you can go into, say, 1970s and say this is when solar started getting cheap, right? That's when an inventor actually just created a better manufacturing process and reduced the cost from $100 a watt for solar to $20 a watt for solar. And then in the 1970s, they were able to start using solar with storage for a lot more applications. So just 1 second with that. Some of the applications they were using, range from everything from the railroads, right? All these guys with money, railroads, maritime use, and NASA in the 70s started using it, but not for what you think, not for quite yet for space exploration, but they really started with creating all these different energy centers across the planet to host and refrigerate vaccines, and actually a myriad of uses, including classrooms. So energy storage helps solve a lot of problems, right? Anybody concerned about climate change here? Yeah. No, I mean, the end of the world's definitely coming. No, I'm just joking. It's okay. Well, it is inevitable, right? I mean, something's going to happen in a few billion years, probably. But we don't know what's going to happen, and we certainly don't know when. 1970s, some of the predictions were, if you can click through this, this is just kind of fun stuff, right? I mean, we're not the generation to invent fear for the end of the world. We're not the first at all. If you can go 2 more clicks, I think would about do. But basically, we should be starving right now. We should be out of power, and we most likely ought to be dead. But we're not. We're here talking about solving the climate change problems today. We're not frozen either, by the way, which is interesting. We're concerned about quite the opposite, I think. Is Washington the new California? Anybody? It's great weather out here. So again, these are just problems. Energy storage, renewables, we're solving these problems together. Next slide, please. So again, I bet you if we were to look into the 50s, I mean, World War II, you can go in the 40s, you can go in the 30s, stock market crash, you can always see something that says, oh my goodness, we're all going to die. And now we're worried about zombie apocalypse, by the way, which I've seen some people out there driving, and I'm pretty sure it's happening right in front of our eyes. So next slide. So some of the problems I want to talk about solving, I've mentioned already with the 1970s where they really started using solar and energy storage. If you can skip this next slide and go to the one afterwards, perfect. So it really starts bringing us to Outback Power in, say, 2001, which is a great place to start because that's when we were found. And in 2001, Outback's really focused into, well, actually, we're really focused in 2001 on mobile use, but until about 2011, the vast majority of all of our systems installed were all off-grid, right? Off-grid, solving problems, putting out leisure cabins so people have power out in the middle of nowhere. We were doing awesome work with the U.S. military, really shortening the supply chain. They could put out forward operating bases and in the middle of absolute nowhere, but not have to worry about having the fuel trucks drive all the way out there to resupply them at all, right? They could be self-sufficient. This is pretty awesome. That's a great solution. So in 2011, we started thinking, again, as my friend Phil over there would say, I wonder what else we could do. I wonder if we can do more solving of problems. What if, and I kind of think, by the way, that the way this kind of happened was solar started getting more popular. And because of that, people started saying, hey, how come I'm putting energy on the roof and I don't have power when the power goes out? So if that started becoming known, right, people started saying, hey, what the heck? Then this idea of like having backup power started evolving, right? So by 2011, Outback was like, hey, my friend Phil was thinking, what we could do is we could have some power when the power goes out. So why don't we create that for our customers, right? Instead of just off-grid. Now we were doing a little bit of grid tie battery backup applications out there before this, but this is when the great shift started happening. It was about 2011. Could we quote that somewhere? The great shift. Sorry, I got some other guys at Outback Power in the room and trying to get some good quotes out of this. So as backup power started becoming more prevalent, Outback created that radiant inverter line, right? Cells going, actually the cells just changed, right? We hit new markets. Now people are saying, hey, we want backup power, but we also want to have power interacting with the grid, right? We actually had 7 operating modes with our first Radian, and that would allow us to work with the grid at numerous capacities. So say, for example, you were working with your home, you got your renewables on the roof, and you're thinking, well, why do I even want to send anything back to the grid at all, right? Why don't I just keep all of my power and only use the grid power as a backup generator? Well, that's a novel idea. Why not, right? This is really important in places like Hawaii right now, by the way, where the power is so expensive and you can't sell it back, right? So this allows you to actually just self-consume, which we've been doing for, again, since 2011 now. So let's see. Typical problems, like, next slide, please. Our friend Ed, oh, sorry, one more back. You just give me the answer. Our friend Ed, right, Hurricane Sandy, that was a big deal. Took a lot of people out of power. Actually, every year since Hurricane Sandy, I think there was a major storm in the Northeast, if not 2, ice storms and hurricanes really hammering the East Coast. This is really accelerating people's desire to have power, right? A lot of generators in use. But of course, you guys see what happened, I think 2 storms ago, where people couldn't even get gas at the gas station to refill their generators. So solar and energy storage to solve that problem. When the power goes out, you're still generating power, and you can keep your energy storage bank full and allowing you to have basically self-consumption of energy indefinitely if you build it that way. So what did Ed need? Next slide, please. Ed needed a system similar to this, right? Replace that grid tie inverter and have another inverter that's going to allow you to work with energy storage. This is at about, by the way, 2011 is about the same time that Elon Musk was doing this too, thinking, I wonder if we can start solving problems with the grid. PV is going to be an issue. More problems to solve, right? Why is PV going to be an issue? And we'll talk a little bit about that. So, next slide, please. So then we started thinking, okay, there's a lot of PV going up. You got big problems in Hawaii. You have big problems in California in terms of a lot of energy being put onto the grid at a massive scale through renewables. So it's happening quite opposite of what the grid was designed to do. The grid was designed to basically take power from faraway locations and bring it in distributively to all these homes and businesses across the U.S. And now you have all these homes and businesses in certain places like Hawaii or California, where there's a lot more than just Washington, and they're putting it right back into the grid. Yeah, we got a lot of smart people in the room, so I'm going to ask, why is that a problem? Yes?
Capacity, number one, and then compatibility with your existing grid infrastructure.
So compatibility with existing grid infrastructure?
Yeah.
Just hitting saturation?
Well, I mean, the grid is just a pipeline covering electricity, right? The grid is just a pipeline.
People outside.
The grid is just a pipeline, essentially, for moving electricity from point A to point B, and it's greatly in need of expansion. And we witnessed this in our state with wind turbine generation on the Columbia River and Bonneville Power Administration at times telling the wind companies, we're not going to sell your power because we need to make money from our hydro assets.
Mm-hmm.
Then, of course, the other problem is obviously energy storage. Solar is not a 24-hour source of electricity, so you have to have some means of storing it. And that's obviously what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, those are great problems. So with that, the biggest problem we got to solve with the utility, I agree with you completely, is basically peak demand. What happens is, oh, next slide, I'm sorry. Need for grid stability. Okay, one more slide. So what we basically happen is we have a power generation plant, and we're all producing solar, and we're selling it back to the grid. If you can click it again, I think you're going to see a duck. One more. That's a great illustration. One more. There you go. So basically, who's heard of the duck? Who's heard of the curve, right? So this illustration is perfect. You can thank Mark Sarasulo for that, by the way, our marketing manager. He's a wizard with things like PowerPoints to really create a display here to walk us through it. But we're basically generating too much power during the day, right? And at night, what happens? Everybody needs power again. So we're not really solving any problem because we have to have just as much capacity available to us, right? I mean, everybody comes home and we start cooking and we turn on all the appliances, and we turn on all the lights, and so you have to have the same amount. You have to have those basic coal plants, and you have to have huge peaker plants, and you have to be working to solve the problem. So next slide, please. So this is it displayed, right? This is forecast for by 2020. We're going to be providing so much energy back onto the grid that we're going to hardly need any power during the day, and then at night, we're back up, right? The duck, or the Peking duck. I like that. It's actually a little bit cooler. So we have peaker plants for the Peking duck. You're getting good at this. That's perfect. So in the nighttime, we can just turn on these huge coal generators, basically, right? And just start pumping out more power. These things are extremely expensive, by the way. It costs more to have these than any other power plant because they turn on when you need it. And that makes power cost a lot more for the consumer, specifically in Hawaii and California where they have the biggest problems. Not so bad in Washington where we have huge hydroelectricity, but you still need to have peakers for when everybody gets home. You can't get away from it. Just was driving in Bellingham the other day looking at the old GP mill, Georgia Pacific, what was that, pulp mill, I believe. And I saw the peaker plant over there, and I'm like, oh, that's where that is in Bellingham. I never really noticed it before, but for some reason the other day, you know what it was? I came back from China a couple of days ago, and I was so out of it that I noticed things I never noticed before. That's exactly what happened. So you got these big peaker plants that have to come up, and guess what? Nobody likes them in their backyard, right? Nobody wants them there. You don't want them on the waterfront, especially in Bellingham. It's a beautiful city. Anywhere is beautiful. You don't want them there. So, but you still have to have them. So how do you avoid it? Well, you can go one more slide. Here's a solution. Huge, ugly, not beautiful, sorry for somebody, energy storage containers, right? And these can be supplying a neighborhood. This can help really work with you on a distributive basis to provide energy in the night and reduce your peak use of energy. One more slide, please. But we also have a problem of not just with those storage tanks, but also with solar. I don't actually know why I put this one in here. I just thought it was interesting with the not in my backyard syndrome of these huge energy storage tanks and this contrast of the same issue with solar coming in and people saying, hey, that's great, but please, not in my backyard. I think it's ugly. I think it's funny to have that. So one more slide. And this is some of the people that actually, they do this, right? They protest on solar because they don't think it's very pretty. So talk to those guys, will you? If you see them out there, just say, we're solving some problems here, by the way. But with solar and complement it with energy storage in any capacity, we'll talk a little bit about the different types of storage you can use, we're really solving some problems here. We could get away from all this water usage, 655 billion gallons of water to supply all of our power we need in the U.S. We could solve the problems of, that's the drought in California. That's also these huge dams, all this energy that we need and all this consumption. We could have it with solar and we can have it with energy storage. So with that, one more slide. You can basically still have your primary plants, but if we're storing energy and selling it back when we need it or using it ourselves and self-consuming it, we're basically frying the duck, right? And we're killing it and we're flattening that curve out. So my point here is really energy storage is solving some incredible problems for us. It's allowing us to have solar. It's allowing us to move forward, and it's pretty cool. And with Elon Musk's new battery, I think it brought a lot of attention to, oh, why are we doing that? Why is that so cool? And it's bringing a little, it's kind of sexy to put something like that in the home now. People like it. So now it's not just purposeful, but it's pretty helpful and pretty good looking. So that whole idea of not in my backyard, now with Tesla, people are like, huh, actually, that's kind of cool. I kind of want that. And one more slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry. One more. Okay, there you go. People surveyed by Solar City are saying, hey, I want to have solar and I want to have backup. Now, it might be a little bit biased, right? Because Solar City is probably talking to their customers who obviously want solar, but they're solving problems out there, and people are saying, yeah, we not only want solar, we want to have energy storage too. How many installers here have installed solar with energy storage? Awesome. Thanks. We know how to install solar, right? So when you talk about energy storage, what are we really talking about? Let me click on one more. How do you get started with this? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the future technologies and what they mean and what the options are going to be. But really, we're just adding, it's the same concept, right? We're talking about putting solar on the roof and having an inverter, and instead of that inverter just simply selling back and pushing energy into the grid, we're talking about keeping a little bit, right? Saving some and using it when we need it. So how do we do that? What are we going to use? What decisions do we make, and how much is it going to cost? All right. Right on it. Thank you. Oh, no, back one. So we have a lot of different chemistries. Anybody work with lead acid batteries? Right. I love lead acid batteries. I think they're still, well, depends on how you want to grade it, but I still think it's the best solution out there economically, and as far as something that we know and trust, they work great, guys. And they're extremely recyclable. What's the recyclability of a lead acid battery?
Any lead acid battery you buy today is probably been a lead acid battery for 40 or 50 years.
What's that? Nearly 100%. What was that? The other one?
Lead acid and beer cans.
Lead acid in beer cans.
Lead acid and beer cans. Aluminum beer cans are the two success stories of American recycling. Nearly 100% utilization.
More so than newsprint, more so than all of that, right? Lead acid, who guessed? Lead acid, it kills people in California, I think. It's a horrible thing, but no, not really. When you talk about having it as a storage, you're not, eating it or anything. So it works. It works. It's worked for hundreds of years. You have it in your car, and it does the job, and it's pretty cheap, right? It's a commodity. It's pretty low cost. There's a lot of different lead acid chemistries. So it's not just one thing, right? Your car battery provides a whole lot of power as you turn that key all at once, and then it's over, right? You try to take that battery and put it into your house so you can have storage. It's not meant for long-term use, for keeping a light bulb on for 12 hours a day. It's not what it's designed for. That's why when you leave your lights on at night in your car, you wake up in the morning and your battery is most likely dead. Does that ever happen to anybody? No, of course not. Not with this group anyway. So you have lead acid, lead calcium, right? Lead calcium is a great battery chemistry, all lead. So you basically want to pick the battery based on your application. What are you doing with it? What are you going to do? Are you going to be completely living off grid? So every day you're going to discharge your battery bank and then hopefully you'll fill it back up again, and so you're cycling it frequently? Or are you just going to be sitting on it, keeping it floating until that one day, gosh, when's the last time your power went out? 5 hours ago. Oh. For how long? Wow, perfect. So for me, it's been a little while. I haven't noticed it anyway, if it did go out. So, but if it does happen, right, you are covered when you have a backup application like that. That's a different chemistry. You don't need to have the same battery for living off grid as you would if you're just in a backup mode. Matter of fact, when you think about lead acid batteries and you think about any battery, it's like, how long do they live, right? What's it take? So you think, well, depends, right? It goes back to this and saying, Well, how often are you going to be using it, cycling that battery, and what's the calendar life? So if you weren't doing anything with that battery and just leaving it in float and just forever, right? Design life, I've seen some batteries say design life is 17 years. I don't know what really that means, design life. I mean, I guess that's just sitting and keeping it, using it, or not using it. But if you're using it frequently and your depth of discharge is say 50%, it's like your car, right? How often are you driving it to and from work? How many miles is it every day? And that's really going to help you decide how long that car is going to last for you. And how do you drive? Are you one of those guys that are looking at their phone and just going slow and maybe too slow? Or are you, like me, probably a little too fast, a little crazy on the brakes and the gas pedal, racing to stop signs? So with the energy storage, you got to think about how you're using those. And I don't care if it's lithium or whatever you're doing. There's different technologies are good for different things. So next slide, please. So that's basically deep cycle or float use, right? Anybody use flooded batteries? Those are lead acid batteries too, right? I don't really talk a whole lot about flooded lead acid batteries because I don't like them. I think they're really hard to maintain, and I'm just not the guy that's going to be doing that kind of thing. I mean, you really should be wearing goggles, wearing an apron, really into gloves and everything, and maintaining those batteries on a frequent basis, right? And caring about them. Otherwise, you're going to murder those batteries, and they didn't do anything to you. They're just trying to help you. So I like the ones that are sealed. That was a joke, by the way. I like the ones that are sealed because, one, Outback sells them, of course, so I'm trying to shamelessly promote that, but also because you don't have to do anything with them. They just sit there, right? And they look pretty good. I like them, and they're there when you need it, and you don't have to really maintain it. So you pick your renewable energy need, and then you pick the location. One more slide. And so you've got this guy who decided he can put the energy storage right into his place. Actually, I don't think that's his house. Is that his house, Mark? Oh, perfect. Okay, so that one's inside the house. It's not required to have this huge ventilation as you might see in a flooded battery bank.
It doesn't really matter. Most manufacturers on the battery is going to tell you it's going to have to have some sort of ventilation requirement.
Yep.
And it's going to depend, of course, on how frequent the cycle of what your DOE is. So as an installer, you can zero inside the house.
I like that. I agree with you. They all do gas a little bit. So how much ventilation you have, certainly it's going to depend on your chemistry. And if you have I don't know what this room's like, but it could be open windows. It could be you're in and out of that room frequently. It could be a mud room, right? And so you don't really have to worry about that. So you get to the next slide, you start thinking, well, okay, so now we're talking about an inverter, a battery bank, and you still got the same renewables, right? So how much cost are you adding onto the system? Well, it depends on how big of a system you need. If you have a hunting cabin or a ski cabin, which would be closer to what I need, anybody want to sell me one or give me one, I'm fine with that. But this is just a small system. This is a 3.6 kilowatt system, right, with a battery bank up to whatever you need, right? Each shelf on this battery bank is about 10 kW, and you can add to it. You can use these batteries, or you can use any batteries. I'm really not here to promote so much of Outback, but it's just a great example. If you go into the next slide, you just grow it a little bit bigger, right? Now you have a radiant system, and you have a bigger battery bank. So this might be for a bigger house, or it might be for additional use, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be a bigger place. It could be just you're a power hog, and you have to come to terms with that yourself. That's another joke. You got it. I saw you smiling. Okay, one more. All right, so you can really make these things about as big as you want. We've worked with installers that have taken Radians, for example, and the 2 dual 10 stacks, getting up to 160 kilowatts, right, with a shared battery bank. Completely nuts and insane, but some people are willing to do it. Necker Island, who's heard of Richard Branson, right? Yeah. So that guy, he has an off-grid island. I mean, that thing's huge. He's got wind, he's got solar. He's of course using some generators to offset him, but he's saved a lot of money on fuel costs for living out there in the middle of the Pacific, and you can really solve a lot of problems with these things. So, but that would be for a much bigger house, and that could be for completely off-grid use. but not really sacrificing a whole lot. You know, for my power needs, I could have that previous system and not really need much of anything else, as long as I have enough renewables on my roof to keep those batteries full, right? So what you're really talking about, you got to buy an inverter anyway. So you're not talking about a whole lot of difference there, and you're talking about adding the battery bank, which can cost you anywhere between $4,000 and really $10,000 or more. You can probably pay as much as you want for batteries. So what about the future? Oh, that's funny. Can you click one more slide? There you go. So what about the future, right? What about Tesla? What about these guys? Who wanted to talk about that? You over there? So Tesla's cool. You know, we've been working with those guys for over a year. I took this shot when I was in Germany at the Intersolar Europe show, and I have so many slides to show you guys if you're interested in all the different technologies they're coming out with for energy storage. But you got to remember, with this Tesla, really good looking battery bank, and the picture of me is only there for size, by the way. I'm not modeling for Tesla. Did not give me the job. But it's just a battery. It's just a component. It's not a solution. It's not a system. It's not on its own solving anything for you. It's just a battery bank, and you probably need a couple of them really to do the job that those other batteries are going to do. Not really here to put down Tesla or promote them. I think that they have is wonderful, and I think they're going to really create a lot of answers for the problems that we have to solve. But there's a lot of technologies out there and a lot of things coming out to the market. I like lithium because lithium, unlike lead acid, you can use almost all of it, right? And then recharge it all the way back up. You can put a lot of power into it, right, without having to manage it so much, like 3 states of charge, as you would with a lead acid battery bank. We've got a diverse audience here. So with the lead acid battery bank, I like to think of storage like a bucket of water, really. So if you were filling a bucket of water, you could take a fire hose into it, and you could use that for about 2 seconds before it starts going all over the place. You're not really filling that bucket. So you're going to have to turn down that nozzle a little bit, put the garden hose in there, and start filling that bucket up, right? At some point, you're going to reach the top. Now, the trick is putting enough energy or enough water in there to beat the cost of evaporation. I'm sorry, not the cost, but basically beat evaporation, right? Does that make sense? So the water is evaporating, you're keeping it full. Call that a trickle charge on a battery bank. You're just keeping it topped off, right? If you can do that using your energy at the same time because you're making so much, it's great. You're going to keep those batteries for a long, long time. But with a lithium battery bank, you don't really need to do that. You can take the fire hose to a much greater extent anyway. You can take the fire hose and just pour water into that bucket, man, and it's full pretty quick. I mean, those cars are now getting charged in about 30 minutes, right? 85 kilowatt hour cars, that's a lot of power, by the way. 30 minutes to charge? I mean, that is taking a fire hose and sticking it in that tank and just dumping energy in there. And that's really super quick. And then you can hit the gas and you can use all that power, probably just as quickly if you'd like to. I don't know what the specs are on the Tesla and how fast you can drain that tank, but imagine if you drive a certain way, you can drain it pretty quick. And when you think about that, by the way, you think, oh, what about all the fire dangers and all these hazards with lithium technologies? I mean, we're all concerned about that as we're driving on gas tanks. But then you have to think about it, though, because there's been some fires, a couple of them, right? And they've all made a lot of news. It's been a new technology in the past, and it's becoming more mainstream. So, as we change and we see different things, we're a little bit concerned and we're worried, and we look at some of the bad stuff. So what happens? Why did they catch fire? Why have they? Why has there been some examples of that? Anybody? Thermal runaway, yeah. So everybody knows what that means, right? Oh, okay. So basically what we're doing is, and I love that answer, it's you're putting energy into that tank so fast, right? It's energy, it creates friction heat, right? As you're doing that, it's just, if you're not managing it correctly, managing the temperature, managing all of that, you're going to start hitting this thermal runaway where that tank will catch fire, right? Where that battery bank will catch fire. Now there's some more technical jargon I can throw in there, but that's not really the purpose of this presentation because I'm talking to everybody from homeowners to installers. But that's just what happens, right? And if you take energy out of that tank too fast, just like rope burn, right? If you're holding a rope and it's getting pulled away from you, your hands are going to burn, right? This has probably happened to everybody. That certainly happened to me. So it's the same kind of concept. That's what we're talking about. So what you need is a battery management system, or you need something that's going to protect you from that happening. And they have that, right? Not to say everything's perfect. I mean, cars catch fire once in a while too. But, I mean, you know, gasoline, oil vehicles catch fire as well too. But I don't think that's really so much the concern. I mean, it always should be in the back of your mind, especially with a company you're unfamiliar with, especially if they haven't been along very long and they don't have any money. You want to probably do business with the bigger guys on new technologies, in my opinion. But that lithium battery bank is allowing you to do a heck of a lot more than just what the lead acids were capable of doing. They last a lot longer. They cost a lot more. And the challenge is really bringing down the price to something that works for all of us, right? And that's what you see Tesla doing. And they brought in this price of $350 a kilowatt, I believe, making it much more affordable than anyone's ever seen before with lithium technologies. And that's what the big hoopla is all about. There's all sorts of conversations about how that's not the right battery bank and what they need to do to change it and all that, but who cares? I mean, they're bringing down the cost of lithium batteries, which is going to allow for mainstream customers, right, to customers that maybe live in Seattle that never really buy from the grid, right? We might just use it once in a while if we want to. Or maybe the grid, maybe what you have is an iPhone app, and you get a little text message from Puget Sound Energy, and it says, hey, we'd like to buy your power. Yes or no, right? Oh, sure, because they know I have storage. I have it registered. And you click the button, and you start selling power back. You don't need it, and it's helpful. Maybe they give you some money. So anyway, again, it's solving some problems that the grid needs with energy storage. Lithium technology really brings us into the future so that everybody could have it. It's smaller form factor, right? That's a lot smaller. It's pretty cool. I don't know that Tesla is going to be the one answer. I think there's going to be a lot of answers out there, and you're going to see a lot of changes over the next couple of years. But certainly the future of renewable energy, just like the past, it's with energy storage. So it's really all I have, and I want to say thank you, and on behalf of all the employees at Outback Power.
Do you have time for a few questions?
I got to go.
You gotta go?
No.
Okay, see you later. Okay, let's.
No, but I might need some of you guys to help me answer the questions. I don't have all the answers.
So talking to an inverter manufacturer, there's one problem that Puget Sound Energy is bringing up about the amount of solar that you can put on one neighborhood grid. And it comes down to harmonics. And if you can talk in a meaningful way about the third and fifth harmonic and explain that to everyone in the room, or at least provide us with the right material to do that, I think that would help out a lot.
Phil, do you have the answer to that question?
So that's the real issue you're running into?
That's
is
the
that
next thing they're going to be bringing up. It's what their economist is actually talking about now.
okay? So what we have seen is in high concentration PV regions, then, well, the IEEE settings that we've been using for 10 years that the utilities all decided were the right settings 10 years ago are dead nuts wrong, okay? And we finally come to an understanding, led by the utilities, that we need grid supporting functionality in the inverters, and that is coming. That is a change you'll see in the next few years. I have, and that should resolve some of the circuit loading issues, but I have not heard of harmonics being an issue. So if you can send me some information, I'll give you my card. Yeah, I'd love to try to get ahead of that one.
They'll probably only talk to the UTC about that. So
Okay.
only the regulators.
And not that I'm going to say, there's sometimes when I question, how many things are real and how many things are perceived or obstacles. So anything that we can do to address those proactively and to be able to show, I mean, maybe it is a real problem, maybe it is. Okay, if so, then okay, what are we going to do to change the standards to address that or whatever? But maybe it's not an issue.
There's been a lot of pushback from different utilities, different locations. Some of those guys are really digging a trench around themselves and trying to keep out solar, at least in their state or in their region, while they're investing in solar in other regions. While some utilities are really working with solar, seeing it to be something that's going to be helpful to them, I would encourage you to engage your utilities and say these are things that we want. It shouldn't be the utility death spiral, if you ever heard that term. It really doesn't need to be anything like that. We're going to need power from the utilities. We don't have solar for every building, right? For every commercial enterprise, for every brick making mill. So we need to have power. We need to have it affordable so we can have our goods. We need to be able to work with those utilities and have maybe more of an interactive relationship instead of just a one-way relationship. And I think a lot of utilities are starting to come to terms with that.
Hi. I have to say that I'm in a different field. I'm a very strong advocate of thermal storage. Basically, I'm really proud to say I had to bring this today. I just got the patent from the patent office as of this week. It's a method of storing energy from sunlight in melted solar lava, and I can make AC alternating current from that.
I love this industry. Congratulations.
It's a lot of work. I want Elton Musk to call me up, please. Basically, the reason why I'm advocate of this is because there's a lot more salt out there than there is lithium. And basically what I'm doing is a real simple design. It's on my webpage, Solar Smelters International. And basically I focus the sun's rays into a hole in the ground, which then melts molten salt or whatever, and then it goes into thermal storage and then hot air, and then it goes out to a wind turbine and a wind chimney. That way I'm able to make AC electrical power even in wintertime and at nighttime. This solves the duct problem. So anyway, it's on the web. Anyway, I'm really proud of this. A lot of work. It took about 4 years to pull this at the patent office.
Congratulations. Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, Brandon. A real practical question. Are you selling grid hybrid systems to residential customers in the Pacific Northwest? And if so, how do they deal with the seasonal nature of our solar resource?
Oh, that's a great question. So the short answer is yes, right? We work with distributors like, I guess we work with solar distributors like AE or Sologent, and we work with local electrical distributors like Platt to help consumers buy grid hybrid inverters in this market. Now, there is a lot of discussion about the Pacific Northwest. You know, it's so cloudy here. Are we really making enough? Do we have enough sunshine to generate power? Is that working? Get a little closer. Okay, so it's an interesting question. The first thing that comes to mind when you ask it is Germany, right? Because Germany actually gets less sun than we do, but they have a heck of a lot more solar, and they're actually exporting their energy to other countries. So it's a matter of scale. I think the issue in Washington isn't necessarily the lack of sunshine as much it is there's not so much a necessity for additional power, right? We have so much water here. We have so many dams. We have hydroelectric, though we are still buying some coal, but we have so much power that my power bill is 9 cents a watt. So that doesn't really, to a lot without some subsidies, it doesn't really justify it on its own to say, hey, we need to have all this solar energy. You have to look at that. So you have other reasons other than just that immediate return on investment, right?
Maybe I own a Tesla.
Yeah, maybe you own a Tesla and you want to be completely self-sustained, right? Or maybe you just want to be green. There's so many reasons, so many good reasons that altogether I think it makes sense for anybody in Washington. You will get a payback, by the way, in a few years. Any installer can answer that question on what the payback period is for solar installation.
It depends.
It depends. Okay, I love that answer. It's true. And it's cool, and it's green, it's healthy, and it's a lot of those things that I think everybody wants. So it's not for everybody right now, but if you see the future, the price is going up. The prices have always gone up. I think makes for more and more sense to have solar. In other markets, when you're starting to pay 20 cents a watt or 45 cents a watt, certainly now it's really easy right, to make that decision.
Whoa, excuse me. We have a question right here. And we have time for one more question before I like to go to the panel, but there will be an opportunity after the meeting to one-on-one to ask questions to the presenters.
Is Outback doing anything on vehicle to grid or bidirectional EV charging?
Yeah, that's a good.
Well, I want my 120 unused school buses to be taking demand from my schools. Yeah, I don't want to put a battery on my wall. I've got one in my pocket.
Yeah, sure.
I don't have anything in my pocket right now.
We do have some, the technology can do that. The application depends on, well, is it the right solution for you? Outback has great inverters, but they're not the right inverter for every single thing, right? So it depends. And I think Phil is definitely the right guy to answer a little bit more specifically on that unique application you're talking about. Oh, that was.
What we're seeing is we have solved volumetric energy production by distributed energy resources, right? Solar is now cheaper than fossil fuels throughout most of America, and it's expanding. We're just going to see more of it. That's a wonderful thing. When utilities are investing in solar because it's the lowest cost option, that's a wonderful thing. We'll see more of it. Now we need to move on to the next thing, beyond volumetric supply, and we got to deal with the fact that electricity is the ultimate supply and demand market. It has to be generated in the exact same volume that it is being consumed at the speed of light. And as Brandon pointed out, we do that with peaker plants. We make up the volume, we make up the base load with base generation. We got a bunch of middle generation, then we got some really expensive peaker plants that make up the slosh, the noise, the chatter. That stuff's really expensive and it's really carbon intensive. And it's one of the things that storage does pretty well at, and inverters do really well at, operating in multiple vectors very quickly. So I think we will see more and more variable pricing, more and more demand response, more and more basically ways of getting paid to use your energy in ways that help level the supply and demand curve. That's where we're going.
Do you want to comment on that?
Well, I will say, stay tuned. You know, even as soon as next week, you're going to see some major announcements following or at Intersolar, not just with our technology, but with others. And this is really growing fast. So it's worth paying attention to. You're really seeing what I would call an energy revolution, right? This is like what happened with I don't want to say things like .com boom or anything like that because those were bubbles, but this is solving a really big problem, right? And you will see a lot of things happening in the next couple of years. It's going to change everything. So you're in for exciting times. Thank you.
Brandon, thank you very much. So we're going to have a panel. We're going to take a moment or two to set up. So feel free to mingle, if you will, or not mingle, but just talk amongst yourselves. And Dean Van Vliet from iTech, who's also a Solar Washington board member, will be the moderator of this panel. So take it away, sir.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Outback, for excellent presentation. So we're going to set up here. Do you guys want to do the chairs up here, or do you want to do stand? Okay, we're going to grab a couple chairs. So while we're getting set up, I'll just give you kind of a quick overview. We've had a very successful incentive in semis. This industry has gotten very busy in the last few years. And that we've also, so the incentive it's doing the job that we wanted it to do, but it needs some touch-ups. We've got to do some fixes to it to get it ready. And we're doing a little moving here. So anyways, a lot of work went into the last year of how can we make this incentive more sustainable so we can get it to go a longer period. So we kind of put together a little panel of people, I should say, deserve a lot of credit for staying on top of what's happening in the industry. I'm sure there's been a lot of trips to Olympia by a few of these people. A lot of hours went into how do we get this incentive to work better. So we're going to kind of do this a little bit freeform. If you got questions, they're going to start off with a quick overview of where we were or what's happened in the last year. And then we'll kind of go into kind of an audience participation questions. So I think Jeremy's going to start with a quick overview of what rulemaking and lawmaking is in Olympia.
In short, what the hell happened?
Yep.
So it says continued up there because they're still working on, transportation. But just going to do a quick review for those of you who aren't familiar what we've just been through. So we had energy bills aplenty in the session just almost passed. Well, actually, the original session's passed. And there was some squabbling amongst the utilities over some of these. But we had our own issues. Next slide. There were actually a number of solar bills that were introduced this session, and they all failed. So nothing has changed. It's business as usual. Whatever was going on is still going on. Next slide. The ones we were concerned with that had to do with the incentive program are kind of followed a tortuous path. A couple of sessions ago, Representative Jeff Morris introduced House Bill 1301 and House Bill 2176, and one of those was to alter actually create a replacement incentive program, and the other one was to create a whole new set of rules for utilities. That's the best way I can describe it. Those bills kind of morph, so you can see that there are arrows pointing down. The next session, we ended up with House Bill 1097, which really took over for 1301. And then we had House Bill 2045, which was a hand-me-down from House Bill 1096, which had its origins in House Bill 2176. You can see where this is going. Meanwhile, on that top row, you can see Senate Bill 6541 was actually a combination of those two original House bills, and that went through its own metamorphosis just to keep something on the books on the Senate side. House Bill 2045 ended up combining both of those original bills in some form, and then it got so messed up that there was an empty bill handy, House Bill 1912, with the title of which was Concerning Distributed Generation. And as long as the body of the bill somehow has something to do with the title, you can shove anything you want in there. So they shoved, well, Representative Morris shoved different versions of those other bills into that bill. Meanwhile, down below you can see House Bill 1927 yearning to be free, but it never happened even after a long stakeholder process in the fall and winter. By the time January rolled around, that bill was introduced by Representative Jake Fye and never brought to hearing. So, but it did end up influencing the bills that Representative Morris put together. Is anybody confused?
So we know how sausage is now made.
Yes. And so here we are today. There was really the stakeholder processes in those two bills was a great deal of value to me, I think, and to the installer group. And, hopefully some good things will come out of that. There was the two of those bills, well, it was originally 2176, it ended up being 2045, would have changed net metering, and there were some other things in there. There were some even crazier things in the Senate bill. So there were a lot of things not to like in these bills, and really we ended up with something that was somewhat agreeable and better than the option that we'd have if nothing passes the next session. So we thought. But there ended up not being enough support for that final version of the bill from other stakeholders. And this all occurred, the last bits of this occurred in these special sessions. So really last minute changes, and everybody kind of staying off balance, all the stakeholders being thrown off balance again and again. So it was a lesson in how not to do this in a way. And we're hoping in the next session to find another pathway to get these things done because of what we are looking at in terms of adoption, which is fantastic, but then how that's affecting the incentive program itself, and then what we can do to address that and still have an incentive program. So I'm going to hand it over to Dave Cozen of A&R Solar because he's one of our numbers guys, and he's going to explain some of the numbers in the incentive bill and kind of where we might be headed if we do nothing, and if nothing changes, or where we hope to be headed.
Thanks, Jeremy. So, Warren, if you could pull up that image first. As Jeremy said, we had a lot of iterations. We looked at a lot of different numbers between a lot of different bills, and this was the final structure that was created. These were the rates for various types of systems and equipment used. Before we get into these, I guess I should say it's a fixed 10-year period that they've been proposing. So right now, as a lot of you know, we have a period until 2020 where you get a certain incentive rate. What this would do is it would just say from the date that you sign up for 10 years, you get a certain rate. And so, the goal of the program is to bring the cost down to make it more affordable for the state, and then also to kind of keep all of us honest and on the up and up, manufacturers reducing costs, installers reducing costs, and so that's why you have those rates declining each year. So if we just look at this top line 2016, what this is saying is for a base rate residential project, which was defined as 10 kilowatts or under, it would be that same 15 cents per kilowatt hour. At one point in time, it was 16 cents. I think it was 18 cents in a bill. I think we really wanted to see 20 cents to make an out-of-state PV system a little bit more attractive and shorten the delta a little bit between the Made in Washington equipment, while of course keeping a Made in Washington incentive there. If it was a commercial system, so anything over 10 kilowatts, that would be a 10 cent per kilowatt hour rate for 10 years. And then for either one of those, if you were using modules made in Washington, there'd be a 12 cents per kilowatt hour bonus incentive. As you can see, that inverter bonus was actually for a smart inverter. The Made in Washington inverter bonus was kind of done away with in a lot of these bills. So the way that these rates were calculated is kind of a push and pull. I think the legislature and the budget hawks really want those rates as low as possible. If you're interested in buying a solar system, you want them as high as possible. From an installer's perspective, we really like a nice balance, because to pay for all this stuff, you have to have a budget, and that budget's going to be fixed. So the lower the rate is, the further that budget's going to take you. And so we're trying to find that optimal rate that allows us to install the most amount of solar while still being attractive and kind of getting the most solar for that budget. So Warren, if you can pull open that Excel spreadsheet. So this is just kind of a basic kind of modeling tool. What happens if a system costs, system size of, right now it says 6.5 kilowatts. So that D6 cell there, if that costs $4.10 a watt, that would be a Made in Washington system. And there's a sales tax, which that's another thing that would go away in the bill. They would remove that exemption. And then our incentive rate was 27 cents. So that's the 15 cents base rate and the 12 cents Made in Washington bonus. And we still had the federal tax credit, which is a whole nother conversation. What this is basically saying, if you're producing an average for PSE and your cost of electricity is average, these are all just kind of average numbers, you get a 9-year break even. So what we're showing them is like, this is really, it needs to be in an 8 to 9 year, under 10-year window for us to have a chance of keeping this market growing. Right now, for a lot of people, it's 4, 5, 6 years, and they're, quote unquote, flying off the shelves, but it's not really a sustainable price point. So that's what we thought was a giving up a lot to just try to make this program work for everyone. And I think we compromised a lot to get to that number, and at some point kind of dug our heels in the sand and say we really can't go below this. So my personal opinion, I think it should be a little bit higher than that. I'd like to see 7, 8 year paybacks, but I don't know that we'll get there. So if anyone wants to plug in other numbers, I'm happy to share this, or we could play around with it tonight. Otherwise, I think I'll pass it back to Dean for questions.
Okay. So at this point, I think maybe we can spread into some questions from the audience on that. So I'm going to be running the mic here, so keep.
I'm somewhat confused. Is the current,
We're on a webinar.
Thanks.
Listening on that.
I'm Roger from Pullman, Washington. Is the current plan that we have that expires in June of 2020, has that been revoked, or is it still current?
It's still current. So the current program is still in effect. All these bills haven't changed a thing.
Thank you.
I know at one point there was discussion around eliminating net metering. What's the status of net metering?
Yeah, that's been one of my pet peeves about this whole process, has been seems like the last minute changes in net metering without really informing people what's going on. The last bill, I believe, kept net metering as it is now, finally, after many iterations of that.
Yeah, I'm not sure which came first, the chicken or the egg, but Representative Morris introduced this huge bill to really change a lot of the way the utilities interact with solar. And then the utilities throughout the Jake 5 process produced their own language, which they had intended to turn into a bill. And so Representative Morris adopted a bunch of that language. And it was just kind of a pitched battle to tone that down or get rid of it throughout. And I think what happened was that there was some dissent among the utilities there. Seattle, for instance, seemed to have no interest in changing net metering. Neither did Snohomish. Actually, the way Seattle does it now, they actually make some money on it because we're typically selling low and buying high. But there was, there was not a unified position on the part of the utilities, and then they got totally distracted by the coal strip bill and the carbon, the climate, mitigation bills and so forth. So that really sort of sucked the energy out of the effort that they had going. And plus, it was very frustrating working with Representative Morris, and some people kind of, I think, threw up their hands. So we won by default.
Just a quick recap of the inverter tax credit. Is that, you said, I heard it was going away or it's not changing?
Sorry, just to be clear, nothing's changing. Nothing's changed, nothing's changing. In the bills that were up there, the Made in Washington inverter bonus incentive would have gone away. But just to make sure everyone's clear, nothing changed this session.
Yes, hi, Louise Petrozella, Director for the Clean Energy Technology Program at Shoreline Community College. I have 10 clean energy technology students here at this meeting. I'm very concerned about their future in the solar industry and gaining employment. I'm wondering if you can kind of talk about the future for the local installers and what you expect as far as business. I know you're booming right now, but these students are going to want to be working for you here in the next year or so. Can you address that? Thank you.
Sure. I'll chime in real quick. We're hiring. If anyone's looking to be an installer or a designer or an electrician, really hard to find people right now. I think all of construction's booming, but so is solar. And I think the way that we see it, and you guys might be on the same page, we got about a year left where if nothing happens, things should still boom or be pretty good for about a year. Outside of that year, it's really up in the air. We're not sure what's going to happen. And to make things even scarier, we have the federal tax credit that's set to expire at the end of next year. So even if we did get something in the state that helps us, who knows what's going to happen federally. So, thankfully, there are some programs that are going to help solar stay around even if the incentives go away. But the boom times could go away for a little bit if we don't see something happen.
I'm a little more optimistic. I think we have a year and a half. Well, I mean, that's why we're in this fight, because we think there's there is a future here. But study batteries too. I mean, the storage thing is going to be a huge component. If you can figure out how to make that thing more efficient, yeah, you're set for life. But really, there's the solar industry is not going to stop because we don't have incentives. It might slow down. And I brought a spreadsheet, but I don't think I'll get into it. Even if our current incentive levels begin to drop, as they already have in some places, and as we expect them to happen, we expect them to drop in Seattle and PSE territory, sooner than 2020 for sure. It can drop 15% a year, and you can still have a 5.7 year payback. So it's not the end of the world, but we might see a trend toward better sites, more efficient installations, if only we could open up the skies and have commercial solar. There's some real efficiencies to be had in the larger installations, and so we're working on solutions, and right now we do need people. I mean, it's really because it's going to go like gangbusters until and if we don't get an extension of the federal tax credit, that's going to be a very tough thing to deal with. But it can be dealt with if we still have our state incentives. So we're fighting on all fronts. If all the incentives go away, we're toast.
Louise, thanks for bringing in 10 students tonight.
Hi, I'm Martin Nix. I founded this organization, so I'm just really thrilled to see this thing going on, like growing, and Jeremy's, and everything. I just want to make a real quick announcement. I'm just going to bring a little bit of help here. I have been in contact with the government of Iran and government of Pakistan. Basically, what's happening here, they have real power shortages in Pakistan. Iran's really wasteful of energy. We're looking at pumping seawater inland to the nation of Iran and also Pakistan and Afghanistan to create evaporation ponds to make it rain. It has not rained there for an entire year. And the Ayatollah is really concerned. So we're running the calculations through on this. The amount of energy required for doing this is really not that exorbitant. We can actually do it. If these negotiations with Iran work out on the nuclear deal, we may be working out a deal between the state of Washington and the nation of Iran to afford solar technology down there. The technology is called heliohydroelectric. It is a plan to pump seawater inland to deserts and to type the salt back out to increase the amount of evaporation. This can reverse global warming. So nobody knows about it, but I actually have a small group of engineers doing the research. So this actually solar technology may become bigger than we think it is. And it'll be more than just photoelectrics. But I encourage people to check out our webpage, heliohydroelectric.org. I know most people don't believe the technology there, but it's a known engineering process. You pump seawater inland, create evaporation, clouds create rain, rain creates vegetation, vegetation removes carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So this is going to be discussed in the Paris Convention. So it's possible we may be seeing a bigger revolution than we think we're going to be seeing here real shortly.
Hi, thanks. I'd like to go back to the previous point about the sustainability of the industry here in the state. It seems like if you look at all the other federal companies or the large companies here in the U.S., The only way that they are able to successfully compete without the state incentives are by going very, very big. So in particular, this means taking a manufacturing operation and then combining it with utility scale solar project developers and possibly also residential installations. Then they split up into yield cos and get a very, very cheap sort of money from Wall Street as a result of that. Now, all of this requires a huge amount of complexity and a huge amount of like MBAs essentially to go even understand it and pull it off well. But is anything like that going to happen in this state? Perhaps you can answer this.
I'll let you guys start.
Well, there are a lot of factors in that little thing you just described. Number one, none of those programs are going forth without incentives. The ITC, the federal tax credit being the key, and then any incentive that happens to be available. Yes, let me have that, please. But you also need to have a solar resource, and you need also to have some high electricity rates. So here we're somewhat hampered in those two departments in Western Washington. And we don't have a state incentive that extends to the third-party companies. So, but there's an interesting history behind the third-party companies. They really came about in full force during the credit crunch, because when we started, our company started in 2001, and most of our customers either just had cash or they had a line of credit. And it was very typical for people to be doing a refinance or to use an equity line of credit. And credit crunch, kind of crimped that. Banks became timid about loaning because they had, really blown it. And leasing came along as a perfect answer to that because, the financing is coming from elsewhere and the tax equity is going elsewhere. And hey, I've got solar in my house and my electricity bill is lower. That's, a very attractive proposition. But since then, financing has become available, and it's actually a much better deal than leasing. So leasing is actually on the wane in certain places. And of course, the biggest company, Solar City, has responded with their own loan program, which in certain areas they're promoting that more than they are the lease now. So seeing a shifting landscape there. But availability of capital is really the key. And so there was a moment there when it wasn't coming from finance institutions, but it did come through the investors. And scale was the other component. Solar City, when they were 2 years old, they had 600 employees and were opening a training center. They just were like a force of nature that you could not stop because they were so well capitalized. Anyway, I don't know if you want, I didn't mean to dominate that.
I'll just comment on the YieldCo. I think to Jeremy's point is the people who are doing those YieldCos are really smart, and anyone who's that smart would probably stay out of Washington.
Aren't you going to talk about the manufacturing side?
Yeah. Actually, to be honest, I missed that part of that question, but manufacturing, we have a lot to get ready here. The state incentive's been really good for a state market. It hasn't been much of an encourager to get out of the state. So we are kind of looking down the road here. We got to get ready to go broaden our shores, go to Oregon, go to Idaho, scary places beyond. So we've got a lot to learn, or I should say, a lot to get ready for. And we're looking forward to it. So Washington's been good for us, but we got to support our Washington installers, and we got to move on next year.
Do you expect that iTech is going to bring its price per watt down to a parity with, say, Solar World or other quality manufacturers of modules by the time the Washington State incentive wanes?
Right. So yeah, bringing prices down. The challenge I can tell you from, I basically have been with iTech from the very beginning, and getting all that equipment started up. It wasn't a simple process. Everything is expensive. Your material costs are, it's almost like walking into a car dealership and you ask for what the price is and you get a number and you believe them. We've been pushing on material suppliers and they start lowering the price down, then you go a little further and then you get a competitive quote and then you get another push. We had material costs that are like 1/4 they are where we started. But the reality is, watching the solar industry, I've been in it from quite a few years. We watched modules, crazy, they were $5 a watt. Back then they've been higher. This is kind of like a running race. We're chasing an industry that keeps getting bigger and bigger ahead of us. So it's all about scale. And right now we're shopping buildings. I remember when we started iTech, we were in a tiny corner of a 10,000 square foot building. That seemed like way too big of a building, and now it's way, 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 way too small. So we're looking at walking through buildings at 100,000 square feet and echo. And the reality is that's not big enough. So it's all about scale. So right now we're trying to put every penny that we can into bank accounts and keep it so we can buy equipment, because that's the reality is we're watching equipment that's available for sale and it disappears because it's snapped up in China. And it's not that China is this country that's doing everything with hand labor. They're buying state-of-the-art Japanese, German machines. So the machines that we're trying to get are going straight to China. So, but yes, our goal is to bring down pricing as quick as we can, because that's the thing is we want to be around to stay around.
Hi, I'm Joan. I have a question about the incentive program that was proposed that is not going into effect right now. It seems to me like the existing incentive program and the example you used for the potential future incentive program, both were about residential solar. And we know that the existing program works great for residential solar. But there's all these businesses and industries and small businesses that it doesn't work for. And it seems like if a new incentive program were to pass, part of the reason would be to open the door to commercial, larger size solar systems, and that those are the allies we might need to speak out in Olympia, because the door is really shut to them right now. And it could create the urgency of expanding the solar program if we really highlighted what the businesses who want to go solar are missing out on. And so I wanted to hear your thoughts about the other side of the proposed incentive program that's not just residential.
All right, I'll make a couple comments and I'll share with Jeremy. This is actually one of our wins, I guess, getting it in there, even though it's not happening. We were fighting to open that small commercial market. Right now you have to own your own building, and you have to be the utility customer, and you have to own your system, and you're capped at $5,000 incentive. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for most commercial businesses right now. So what we were able to get in the bills there were that remove that requirement to own the building. So if you lease your building, or if you have some type of approval from the owner, then you can get the incentives. And then also increase that cap a little bit. And so I think what we had was a $500 per kilowatt per year cap up to $25,000. So that would get you to basically you remember that was like a 150 kilowatt system maybe, or 100 kilowatts, somewhere in there before you hit that cap. And you can go bigger than that. You would just be capped at the 25,000. I think I stole all your thunder, Jeremy. Do you have anything to add onto that?
Well, the disappointment was the rates that we ended up at, because they're not really high enough for, I mean, if you've tried to sell solar to, business owners who own a building, it's tough. It's really tough because most of them are looking for a very quick return on it. And the rates that we ended up with were not there. But we did expand the scope of the limits of of the incentive that are available, and that would definitely encourage some. The other thing is commercial buildings are in all various states of their existence, And a lot of the ones that are local are doomed. They're going to be torn down and replaced by something else. So there's a whole aspect to the real estate cycle that we have to consider where, you build a house and it's just going to be there. I mean, my house is 108 years old. So, that's a different deal with a commercial building. So it's complicated.
I just wanted to add something that I think is important is community solar. From what I know, it's about 60-70% of the people don't have the site to install solar on their own home, and my hope was we'd have a very strong, much stronger community solar program that allowed groups of people to get together to install solar. And I think that was addressed somewhat in the bill. I think they took some things out that limited community solar. But from my perspective, we could do much more if we had a strong community solar program and also a program for lower income people. I think would be a huge thing for our community, which I don't think this bill did anything to help bring solar to lower income people, despite what the leasing companies tried to say that if we allowed leasing that it was going to bring solar to everybody, which I don't believe is true. But yeah, those two things to me are huge things that we could do to promote solar in our state with the new program.
Yeah, I find it kind of ironic because I was trying to be a solar installer about 5 years ago. I was out walking around looking at houses, and I came to a conclusion that the wealthier people that could afford solar had the most complicated houses, and the people that could not afford solar had the perfect houses. So it's just kind of one of those. Just point. We need to open up those avenues.
Hi, I'm Bob. I have a question, more practical. You said on the screen there that the system price, in one case you quoted 29,000, in another case you quoted 20,000. And I guess what I'm really trying to get down to is, okay, I own a residential home. What would you expect for a price for a residential home, and how does that compare to like your 10 kilowatt production, and how many square feet on somebody's roof are we talking about?
Well, the install cost can vary a lot because of the products that are available. But what's the average size you're putting in these days? 6.5? Okay, yeah, it is creeping up. Yeah, it is 6 to 7 now, isn't it? My brain goes back to the 1 kW days. That's right. So, if that's if you're getting an inexpensive out-of-state product, let me just say for 6 kilowatts because it's a little easier to do the math in my head. You might be looking at 17 to 19,000 or something like that for an installed cost, and that's going to produce let's say it's 6 kilowatts and you've got a simple south-facing roof with not a lot in the way. You're going to make 6,500 kilowatt hours a year, which could be all of your electricity if your house has gas heating, or it could be all of your electricity if you have an efficient house. So we've come a long ways in terms of the impact you can have at your house. The first net metered house in Seattle we did, and it has 1.45 kilowatts on it, and it covers the entire south roof. It was a thin film product, but it was really inexpensive compared to, relatively inexpensive compared to the crystalline products. That same roof area now could hold, like 8 or 9 kW, and that's a huge leap forward. Speaking of local manufacturing, one of the cool things about iTech is that they have kept up with a pace with the industry, and so the original modules out of there, 240 watts, and now they've got UL listing all the way up to 310. But here's an interesting thing: the 270 or the 275s, which is really kind of a lower mid module density now, 275 watts for a 60 cell module. That has the same power density as my Sanyo 190s, which were the most power dense panels you could get when I got them in 2005. Well, actually, there were some 200s, but I mean, it was that power density was huge, and we paid $5 a watt or $4.85 or something. Now, the same power density in a much less expensive product. So there's huge gains we've made. It's just kind of hard to see them sometimes because the customers take them up and just put up bigger systems. So we're still talking about $15,000 to $20,000, but back when we started, $15,000 to $20,000 was 2 kilowatts. SunPower 345s, Dave. No?
If you had like a, I don't know, 10 feet by, say, 40-foot roof area, you could probably fit, 20 modules in that. So what's that, 400 square feet? It's, maybe 80 square feet per kilowatt. And these are really rough. I don't know if anyone's got a better metric on this who's out there, but average home figure 400 to 500 square feet would do anywhere from 70% to 100% of the power needs, depending on the usage and orientation of the roof. And that's the ballpark of the 18,000 on up to 25, 30,000, depending on the equipment that you choose.
So I have getting back into politics. So there's another effort in the other Washington to extend the ITC. I think it's sponsored, I can't remember the actual sponsor of the bill, but it's co-sponsored by Jim McDermott here in Washington.
HR 2414.
There you go.
So HR 2414.
So I think I can't remember what the committee it's in, but nevertheless, any suggestions as to what the industry as well as the public can do vis-a-vis this particular legislation to make sure it renews?
I'm relying a lot on SEIA, which is the National Solar Energy Industry Association. And I know that's their main focus is getting this extended. So I kind of do what they tell me to do. I actually sent an email today to both of our representatives here in Washington State. In fact, I tweeted it, and I don't know what I did, but I mentioned Solar Washington and Solar Installers of Washington. So that's out there somewhere, or you can find SEIA, and I'm sure it's just real easy. Put your name in, type in your zip code, and it just sends a message. So at the very least, do one of those forms, let those people know that you care about it. Beyond that.
Yeah, definitely, get in touch with your legislators. The last time we got an extension of the federal tax credit was in 2008, and one of the people instrumental in making that happen was Maria Cantwell. So, well, I was going to say we have a dog in that race, but it doesn't sound very good. Anyway, yeah, basically get a hold of your, write, email, call your U.S. representatives and senators and tell them you expect to see the solar tax credit extended.
Testing. Is there any talk or help in Olympia working through L&I to try to get a specialty installer, specialty permit, a sub permit or whatever you want to call it, to give installers a little broader playground to play on, because L&I takes a very limited view as to what installers can do without being a licensed electrician or being supervised by a licensed electrician?
Well, Washington is a good place to be an electrician, put it that way. Because over the years, the IBEW and other, supporters of the trade have really managed to, capture a lot in Olympia. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Someday we may look at having a designation for a solar contractor because, the people that are doing these installations are a hybrid. They're not strictly electricians. And there are lots of electricians that just don't want to go up on rooftops. So it would be, something that we can look forward to maybe doing. We have a mole in L&I now. Former board member of Solar Installers of Washington now works for Labor and Industry. She's in the prevailing wage department, but at least, we can get the inside dope on how to approach these things, as it really is done through the legislature.
Because technically we could be installing more modules if we had more installers, more electricians on the roof, in a way.
Yeah. I mean, a few years ago, we had our pick of lots of awesome electricians. But now the construction boom has really preoccupied all of them.
Bill Paulin, CEO of Generations Credit Union in Olympia. I could talk about solar lending all night, but I'd bore everybody to death. I'd add a politics question. Since I am in Olympia, if I find myself, next door to a table at a restaurant with one of my legislators, what kind of dollar amounts are we talking about that the state is kicking in for the production incentives? And kicking in is probably the wrong word, but what gross numbers, anybody have those at the ready?
We try not to kick those around very much.
Okay.
Because they keep getting bigger. It was pretty small in the beginning, but the Department of Revenue informed us that fiscal year 2015 is going to be around 17 million. And the same time next year, we were looking at north of 25 or something. So because of the rate of growth, and we don't see anything stopping it right now. So as the years go on, that number gets bigger under the current program than it would year over year with the replacement program we were looking at. But there's a difference. The current program comes to a halt. There's no more incentive paid after 2020. The one that we were in the bill that we were talking about is 10 years from that last application that's accepted in 2020. So it goes into 2030, and the ultimate cost was in the $200 million range if you the accumulated cost of the whole program.
Even at 15, 20 million, those sound like large numbers, but for the sort of impact that it's having, those don't sound like large numbers to me. Those sound like peanuts.
I think that's the key to the conversation is there is a cost, but there's also a lot of benefit. And so if you're just looking at the cost, then it does feel like a big number, but it'd be great to be talking about that benefit hand in hand. And I know Solar Washington put out a paper showing what that benefit was, and I think SIW is in the process of getting a new survey, new study going to show, what could it be under our new program, which would be even more impactful.
Yeah, and just to reinforce, Matt, really that's an investment that we're making in the state, and we've all got to be armed in our pockets at the top of our tongue with what is the benefit to the state, what is the reward, what is the impact, the positive impact in terms of jobs and investment and all those things, because we've got to be able to rattle that off. Exactly.
Right, so
it's an
here it
investment,
is.
and here's the return.
So here it is. The $200 million figure was bandied about by Representative Neely in the Finance Committee, who also sits on the Energy Committee from which 1912 originated. And he got that number from a DOR estimate. So I looked at the fiscal note that the Department of Revenue wrote for this bill, and they estimated that the entire program would incent the installation of 163 megawatts of solar. So I just worked that backwards. That's $650 million injected into the economy. That's $4 million just in B&O taxes. There's about $69 million that would come back to the state in sales taxes, both directly from the sales of the systems and also because this would create $195 million in payrolls. So there are some big numbers that we have Yeah. Yes, this is we're talking about economic development here.
Yeah, there's definitely been a lot. We're running a little close to 8 o'clock. We'll take a few more questions here.
I want to go back to, this is Ron Snell. I'm a Sierra Club volunteer and solar owner. One of the things, a couple of people have brought points up around some of the stakeholders who really ought to be at the table around the business interests and interests in community solar. One of the questions I have is, does Solar Washington have any plans in kind of, if you will, orchestrating a coalition of solar supporters to really push some of this legislation through? My sense is that Solar Washington is fighting this battle on their own, and you don't need to be doing that.
I like the sound of that because I've been to all of those damn meetings, and the utilities have, each utility has two people at the table. So they just basically fill up the whole table. And then here we are, maybe two solar people, and then there's a sprinkling of enviros, and then there's a couple of, just plain, solar people. But we are vastly outnumbered in certain respects. So it would be great to have more people at the table. A lot of those meetings are by invitation, but if you're good, if you don't disrupt things too much, you can get invited back.
Yeah, I learned it's very frustrating for just an individual to get involved too much in the process. They don't make it easy for just a citizen to go make comments. So building coalitions and getting a bigger voice, I think, is critical to getting legislation passed. Just one quick thing I wanted to add before we ran out of time here. From my perspective as just a citizen that owns solar and kind of looking at things from the outside, what I saw this session was this big red herring of leasing. Everything was talked about leasing. That's going to, depending on which side you're on, it's, and I don't see that as the issue. I mean, to me, the incentives and how we're going to keep the utilities solid in their income, those are the things we need to be addressed. Leasing, in my perspective, in this state doesn't make sense, but I think that kind of waylaid, at least in the public's eye, that's all that was focused on was the leasing, and is it going to be good for the state or bad for the state? So I hope this next session that we kind of hopefully get away from the big argument about leasing and really focus on what we need to do to keep solar going in the state.
We just need to become media barracudas like the Alliance for Solar Choice, because that's a result of a lot of what they've been doing for several years.
If there are any media barracudas in the room or listening online, please contact us.
Okay, we probably have time for one or two more questions here. I saw one here.
Do you, as designers, see any of the word on silicon carbide or some of the other transistor technologies make a big change in the inverter landscape for new installations in terms of reducing the balance of system cost?
It's above my pay grade here, Jeremy.
I used to sit through those presentations at ACES conferences because they're really cool. I mean, they're just amazing, so I'm not familiar with what you're talking about, but there could be something sneaking up on us, in that respect. But what I did learn was there were a lot of technologies that are 5 to 10 years off that just keep on being 5 to 10 years off. And meanwhile, incremental, improvements are made. So, inverters went from big, heavy transformers to switching technology, et cetera. So, yeah, if there's something cool coming up, that'd be great. Maybe we should know about it.
Yeah, kind of. I do agree with Outback on we've turned the curve, because I remember back in 97 or 98, we were talking about the number of grid-tied systems in California, and it was about 300 trace inverters. Total California install on it. So it's kind of crazy how it's gone. And now it was a big number. And now we're kind of transitioning back. Energy storage is becoming a bigger thing. So I think we're going to see some exciting stuff in inverters.
My take on it is there's really two levers. One is cost down and the other is value up. And I've always been a strong believer that you do a lot more by bringing value up than cost down.
All right. Well, I appreciate all the questions for the panel. I appreciate the panel's willingness to take on a hard question of what happened in Olympia. I think that graph that Jeremy showed there is probably that shows what happens there, and that's the reality. That was probably, a year's worth of work. You probably made, 20, 30 trips to Olympia? 40 trips, yeah. So a lot of work went into this, and I would say a lot of parties did, so big round of applause for these guys for putting all the work into it.
Thank you all very much for coming out tonight. I want to thank Warren, our AV volunteer, once again. Can't do it without him. And as usual, you're welcome to join us at the Finney Market Pub, just about a half mile down the street. So thank you all very much for coming.